Welcome to the Good Eggs of History podcast. Here we explore the more unknown historical rule breakers, the rebels, the brave, and the bonkers. I'm Hannah Shekel, and I'll take you on a journey to discover these absolute badasses. Now, the previous episodes have been about women, but it isn't just women that can be good eggs. We are off to Belgium today to talk about Albert Ier and why he became known as the Soldier King. Firstly, the classic historical facts, and I know history can be a bit dry, so bear with me. He was born in 1835 and was the second son of Prince Philippe, Count of Flanders, and his wife Princess Marie of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen. Sorry for the pronunciation, and you might as well apply that for the rest of the podcast as well. Albert wasn't originally expected to rule. His older brother, Prince Baudouin, died unexpectedly. However, the studious Albert prepared himself arduously for the task of ruling the country. He had also received military education, as male royals often did, and enlisted in the regiment of grenadiers, who interestingly only took on the tallest men, but as Albert was over 6 feet tall, he had no issues there. He was an imposing man and had the striking features that many across Europe shared, such as his cousin Kaiser Wilhelm II. Still, the gene pool was deeper than that of the Habsburgs that I mentioned in the last episode. Not difficult. Albert was married on the 2nd of October 1900 in Munich to Bavarian Duchess Elisabeth Gabrielle Valérie Marie, and together they had 3 children, Leopold, Charles and Marie-José. The family was very popular in Belgium. They were markedly different from the previous king, Leopold II, Albert's uncle. He had been an aloof authoritarian figure, involving himself with prostitutes and mistresses, and even attempting to marry one. In contrast, Albert and his family seemed happy, down-to-earth, as much as a ruler can be, and fairly harmonious. He was an intelligent man and seemed to care about the welfare of his subjects. During his youth he donned disguises and travelled around working-class areas in order to see what the real living conditions were like for his people. Despite his education, his first interest was Belgium's economic development, and he keenly followed all the latest technological developments. He felt the conditions of workers, particularly industrial, needed great improvement, and did work hard to see that this was done. Additionally, before his accession to the throne, he did a tour of the Belgian Congo for the same reason. When he returned, he proposed reforms to protect the indigenous population. This was completely opposite to Leopold, who oversaw the country being ravaged, with the death toll during his control being between 2 and 13 million people. Europe before World War I was very tense. Powers danced around each other, trying to tie themselves into alliances, ententes, and promises of neutrality. No country wanted to appear weak. There was overt military and naval competition, edges of empire started to fray, and no one was willing to give any quarter. On the 2nd of August 1914, Germany asked for safe passage through Belgium in order to invade France. Albert refused, stating that Belgium is a nation, not a road, which is amazing. Germany claimed that France were about to invade through Belgium, which was actually completely false. In fact, the opposite orders in France had been given. After receiving Belgium's reply, the Germans invaded, which thus brought Britain into the war, who had signed a Treaty of Protection in 1839. Despite Germany thinking this would be an easy task, the Belgians offered fierce resistance, leaving the Germans to battle through towns littered with snipers and a population that wasn't prepared to lay down arms. In fact, Albert took personal command of the Belgian army, despite the British and French repeatedly asking him to hand over command to them. His army held the Germans off long enough for Britain and France to prepare for the Battle of the Marne in early September 1914. However, the German war machine inflicted heavy losses on the Belgian army, and they had to withdraw to a small piece of land known as the Yser Front. They dug themselves in there for the next 4 years, engaging in bitter, horrendous trench warfare. If you want any idea of what that's like, watch 1917 by Sam Mendes. It's muddy, bloody, gruesome, unforgiving. Albert still commanded from the front line, and he went to meetings with his government in exile in Paris, flying his own personal plane there and back each time. This plane's now in the Paris Aviation Museum. His whole family were deeply committed to the war effort. His wife, Elizabeth, worked as a frontline nurse, and he even allowed his 14-year-old son, Prince Leopold, to enlist to serve as a private. Albert would be the last head of state to participate so directly in war. It was said that the German soldiers didn't shoot at him because he was the highest-ranking officer on the field, and that it wouldn't be right. Or more likely, he was a relative of Kaiser Wilhelm, so they feared being punished if they shot Albert. The war inflicted terrible destruction on Belgium. Albert trying to limit the devastation as well as the number of casualties, worked behind the scenes to negotiate peace between the warring powers. He thought that would be the best way to protect Belgium and its people, as well as for the future of Europe. Unfortunately, none of the nations were willing to come to a truce, and instead pursued total victory. All his attempts to bring about a peace were unsuccessful. However, he remained in command of his troops and led the final offensive of the war that liberated occupied Belgium. He and his family returned to Brussels as the hero of his people. He continued looking after his people post-war, such as introducing universal male suffrage, acknowledging there were 2 national languages, and recognising trade union freedom. Following the war, there was mass unemployment, as a lot of industry had been decimated. Factories were destroyed, or key parts and materials literally removed from the machines by Germans, therefore making production impossible. All the exports that the Belgian economy relied on pre-war, such as coal, steel, textiles and glass, had been blockaded, further rendering production impossible. Albert was closely involved in the redevelopment of these industries obliterated by the Germans. Interestingly, he strongly advised against harsh peace terms against Germany. He thought that this would protect against future German aggression, which would actually turn out to be accurate. Considering what his country and his people had suffered at the hands of the Germans, this was a surprisingly gracious and intelligent standpoint. Sadly, he was not listened to. Albert received so many post-war honours for his efforts towards peace, and the willingness to lead his army from the front. It would honestly take me such a long time to try and name all of them. He got honours and medals from countries across the globe, from Afghanistan to Venezuela. His epithet post-war became the Night King, or the Soldier King. Additionally, he was also a committed conservationist, creating a national park, and he had a great love for nature. Unfortunately, it was this love for nature that did for him. He died in a mountaineering accident, which some believe was foul play, as he was an expert climber, but it was just as likely it was an accident. Albert was a good egg because he deeply cared about his people during a time when most European powers had their eyes fixed to what other countries were doing. He played the role of peacemaker, and despite being unsuccessful, that was not something many others were willing to do. He tried hard to rebuild his country post-war, focusing on important industries that had been destroyed. He was an intelligent, compassionate leader who behaved with grace, even towards those who wanted to exterminate his country. Thank you for listening. I'm Hannah Shekel. Please join me next time to enjoy the next Good Egg.